like to welcome you to LSAT Unplugged. I appreciate you joining us. I think that today I'd really like for the students to get to know a little bit about your experience, and really this conversation will kind of go around how to leverage experience and interest in specific areas of law to create a compelling story of why law school, whether it be personal statements or how to communicate those experiences. So I'd love for you to first start off by telling us a bit about yourself.
Sure. Awesome. So always a big thank you to Steve. I've been working with him for about 2 to 3 years now. It was serendipitous that I connected with him. We were looking for outstanding LSAT tutors to connect with in terms of my admissions company. We stumbled upon Steve. We saw his incredible blog and his YouTube station, which is unreal, with amazing content that he provides for free, which we really liked. And so he's had me now, I think it's my 3rd year in a row. So I'm really, really grateful to him and to the team for that. So that's first and foremost. By way of background, I'm an untraditional candidate. And I think hopefully a lot of you will relate to me in some way or other. I was born abroad, went to high school internationally as well. So I studied in the British system. So I did the International Baccalaureate and the GCSEs. And then I came to the United States. I started at UCSB. I lived here before as a kid, moved abroad, came back to do my undergraduate at UCSB, then transferred to UCLA. Graduated. Thankfully, I was able to graduate near top of my class in a subject I loved, history and political science. Wasn't able to really secure a job, and then was able to decide that I'm going to go to law school, except there's one major inhibitor, and that was the LSAT. So I took the LSAT for the first time in December of 2003 at the time. It was a long, long time ago. I didn't do well, or I didn't feel I did well, and so I canceled my score. Took the exam again in June of 2004, did horrifically bad. June 2003. So I took the first time in December 2002, took it again in June of 2003, and then realized I'm just not going to get the score I need to get into a top 15 law school. Now, I had done well at UCLA. I had, I thought, a compelling story. So I spent between June, July, August, September, October, really fine-tuning and perfecting my application. And then I started submitting my application. The first school I think I submitted to may have been Berkeley. And then thereafter, I submitted to 17 different law schools between, I want to say, the first or second week of October, all the way through to the first week, I want to say, of December. And then I took the LSAT again for the 3rd time, hoping I'd do better. Just by way of background, I studied, I took test masters 3 times. I must have taken 60 practice tests, but Steve was probably only a small kid at the time, so he was not there to rescue me. And unfortunately, I did worse, and even worse. And so I think I ended up with a 154 average score. But I applied to all these law schools, and thankfully I got into one of my top 4. My number 1 was Yale. My number 2 was Harvard. My number 3 was Columbia. And number 4 was Berkeley. And I was able to get into UC Berkeley and waitlisted at Columbia with a 154. And I would attribute that to my grades, but also, and I would say a lot to do with the story I told. Through that process, I understood that if it's really critical to put everything you can into that personal statement. And Steve will hate me for saying this. And it was funny. We had a conversation about this the other day, because I said, Steve, do you feel like your job's going to end soon? Because so on, so forth, they're getting rid of standardized tests, right? In undergraduate schools, you guys are seeing that. In graduate schools, something they're getting rid of the GRE. Even the GMAT is getting phased out with some of the programs. This could just be temporary, but I think it's going to catch on, right? And so far, the LSAT, he said, no, I think my job is okay. And if not, I'm going to pivot to something else. The guy's a genius, so I'm sure he's going to be able to use his incredible brain power to unriddle the MCAT or what have you. But the idea was I put everything into the application process itself. And I think that's really what helped get me in. I know it did, because when I went back and I spoke to the dean of admissions at UC Berkeley, he most certainly remembered my personal statement. And I can again tell you, I put in about 4 months of solid thinking, brainstorming, going around in circles, asking people if this made for a compelling story, thought about different ideas, and then finally kind of narrowed it down and just went all at this story that I told. That was very personal to me, and I complemented that with a diversity statement. I underscored that with an addendum, a strong addendum as well, and then I was able to obviously have a catch-all with the resume. That got me really into the whole world of admissions and storytelling and story crafting. A couple of years after I graduated, or excuse me, a year after I graduated, I decided to start my admissions company, and I really focused on law, but I also did work on MBA applications and college applications themselves in terms of admissions consulting, understanding how to tell a story, which really I've worked on every single possible application you can imagine, from PhDs in anthropology to nursing to dentistry to medical residencies, law, MBA, transfer, Rhodes scholarships, you name it. I've guided students, helped students in many different ways in regard to their applications. Quickly after graduating from law school, starting my admissions company, working at a private law firm, I ended up eventually working for the US government doing international development law. And what's interesting about that is the fact that I wrote about what I wanted to do in my personal statement in 2003, ended up doing exactly what I really wanted to do in 2012. Serendipitously, the world just somehow, I guess you manifest, right? You project your future. And so I wanted to do this, and I ended up doing that 9 years later. Did that for about close to 5 years, resigned with the previous administration for obvious reasons, and then went back to grad school, put everything that I had learned in the last 8 years of doing admissions consulting, was able to get into Harvard with a full scholarship to do a master's in public administration, finished that, moved back to California, put my company on the map, grew the team, and now I do that as well as now I'm currently helping disabled veterans get their disability benefits. So I help veterans better put together a compelling case to be able to secure their disability benefits, whether it's mental or physical disabilities that they had from their time in service. And that's where I am right now.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's pretty obvious to students how accomplished of a career you've led. And I appreciate you sharing the struggle of the LSAT, because I'm sure it's something that we can all relate to. I want to note, just before I go any further, that students are welcome to ask questions on the chat, and I will do my best to voice those. And so I think that it's, you seem very passionate about the art of storytelling and the importance of using storytelling to convey your experiences and really what makes you unique. And so for students at the beginning of that process, what advice would you give them in navigating what story they're going to tell or how to tell that story? And what did that look like in your experience?
So I feel like a lot of people have a few compelling stories, right? Not just one, but a few. Sometimes we have to choose one. Sometimes we can hybridize some of the essays together. So you may have a story that's very compelling about your upbringing and an incident that happened, and then it almost seems trivial, but there's another issue that you had in sports. They don't seem congruent, but somehow there's an underlying connection between the two that you can bring together. So sometimes you hybridize a story, right? Bring them together. Sometimes you just say, I'm going to focus on this story for the personal statement, and then this story for the diversity statement, right? So don't be scared that if you end up having multiple stories, what you should do. The initial thing I would do is obviously just throw the ideas on paper. And it's literally mind mapping, right? You guys ever mind map? It looks something like, I'm old school, sorry, I use pens and paper still. So let's imagine you've got something in here and you have that incident, right? So you have the incident right here in the middle, and then you're thinking to yourself, okay, well, I know I was scared. I know this led me to take this internship. I know this led me to meet this individual. I know this. Well, then you talk about the internship here, right? And then you say, okay, internship, but then that led me to do this publication that I did, right? And you see, like, you slowly start building it out, right? Something like that. And you just slowly start mind mapping this thing. And you say, okay, that may be the most compelling. But then you realize, you know what? No, I keep putting this at the center, but really what it should be that internship. It was really hot. I'll give you the example that I used. I had two stories I wanted to go with. one that was interesting and one that was compelling and personal. The interesting one was that I got, back in the day, I bought a laptop on eBay. I never forget it. And the guy never sent me the laptop. He was actually located in beautiful Calgary, I think in Alberta. And I tracked him down. And for 2 years, I finally found the guy, and the police caught him. And they gave me, I was the only person that they gave restitution to, which they give some kind of compensation for having gone through that. And I want to write about that to illustrate my sense of determination, my sense of resilience and desire to seek justice, right? But if I erased my name and put, let's just say, your name, Gabby, at the top of it, would that work? Yes, it would, right? The essay would work, because it wasn't really personal to me. I experienced it, but it really wasn't personal to my core, except for the fact that it highlighted a couple of things: resilience, a desire to seek justice, right? A sense of determination. But at the end of the day, it wasn't that personal. The other story I had was meeting a family member for the first time in my life, and what that showed me about myself that I didn't know. And it turned out, about meeting that person, I was better able to understand my identity. And my identity was going through a very tumultuous time in history. And part of that tumultuous nature of its political, landscape was law. And so I was able to really kind of carve out something that talked about my identity, something to talk about my family, something to talk about me personally, and something that talked about my future. It was a no-brainer. If one of them really illustrated certain attributes I had, the other one illustrated every aspect of me. And that's how I decided to go with that story. Now, not everybody will have a story like that. So what you really have to ask yourself is, number one, you've got a question to ask, which is, what is it in your life that is driving your decision to go to law school? The other essay, the diversity statement, is asking you, what is it about who you are that's going to be able to add value to the class? So you really want to think about what it is and create that element of continuity, that story that says, I started with X, then I went to Y, I did Z, and now I've got to go here. Otherwise, if I don't go here, then everything was for nothing. Does that make sense? So it's what you need to do is, as I said, the first step is just throw down ideas, things that really make you unique. And the easiest way I do this for my clients is to say to them, guys, write 10 things that you have to see in your application. 10 things, right? So we got a guy here, Ben, right? I love the fact that you have your camera. Thank you for having your camera on, because now I can see human beings, not names. If you guys can put your cameras on, I would love it. It would mean a lot to me. So Ben, for example, you have 10 things that you want to put in there. Sports, something that you did actively, a place you traveled to, a volunteer experience you had, an issue you had with your mom, an issue you had with your sibling, an issue that you had in terms of an identity crisis you had, a class you took, right? An award you won, right? A certificate you received, right? Some things like that, you're like, these are so core to my identity. These are so core. These milestones, these markers in my life are so important, right? That it really will help me, and it has to be included in my application. Otherwise, I'm not going to stand out, right? Just start with those 10. Once you start thinking about all those 10 you put on paper, you're like, okay, now there's no way I'm going to put 10 of these things in my personal statement, right, guys? There's just no way. So what I'm going to do, if I've got 4 components, personal statement, we said why you want to go to law school, diversity statement, how you add to the class value, addendum about an issue that you had going to school, right? And then, I did poorly in my 3rd semester. Let's say Ben had an issue where, he was helping a sibling and he had to work a full-time job or a part-time job. He may not want to talk about that in his personal statement, but he does want to mention his application. Boom, he hits it in his addendum, right? That says, I didn't do well in my 2nd semester or my 3rd semester because I had to balance a part-time job and stuff like that, right? He addressed it. That's great. That's great news. He was able to do that, right? And then whatever he wasn't able to include in all those other 3 documents gets tossed in the resume, right? Unless it's a incident that happened that can't be tied to a thing you want to put in your resume. There may be 1 or 2 things that will fall off, but you want to capture as much of those things in all those documents. From those, that's when you start finding that really beautiful one that you need for the resume. Not for the resume, for the personal statement, and highlighting it in terms of that, answering that crux of that question. why is it that you want to go to law school, without explicitly saying, I want to go to law school because. And if you want, Gabby, at the end of this, don't forget to ask me my top 5, 6 things of what not to do in your personal statement.
Well, I certainly will, and I'm sure that we'll get there pretty shortly here. But one distinction that I think you noted and is very valuable is this difference between a compelling story and one that is maybe more personal. And I don't necessarily think that there has to be a trade-off, but in instances where they are, and you're talking about an internship where it was, a very unique experience, but at the end of the day, you could replace your name with somebody else's and nobody would know the difference. How do you kind of foresee those? How do you personally differentiate those experiences? And how do you decide how to categorize those experiences or those attributes that you identify with between the personal statement and between the diversity statement?
Just keep asking yourself that fundamental question, guys. Is this question answering why I want to go to law school and become a lawyer, or not a lawyer? I hate saying that. Don't ever write why I want to become a lawyer, right? Because there's like 50 different fields that you could do as somebody who studied law. So don't write, I want to be a lawyer. You guys get it? Because you guys may want to be judges. That's not necessarily lawyers, it's judges, right? Somebody wants to be a politician. You want to become a journalist. You want to be an entrepreneur. I'm an entrepreneur as well. Doesn't mean I'm just doing legal work, right? So you want to answer that question, why do you want to go to law school and study the field of law? If that question and that compelling idea is not fitting that rubric, it's not going to work. Because as I said, you have other components of the application. Now, guys, don't forget, there's a third essay, right? So there's one that's a personal statement, one that's a diversity statement, one that's asking us, why do you want to go to that school? So you also want to make sure that you can address that as well. And again, Gabby, you can remind me at the end or at some point, because that's becoming a very common question that comes up amongst the applications. So that's, I think, how you want to suss out which of the most compelling stories fits which bubble within it. Now, what I want to do as well, and again, Gabby, you can guide it because you're the moderator here. I do have a roadmap of how to write the personal statement. And part of that will also help you kind of shape answering that question that you have. So let me know if you want me to do that now, or we could do that later in terms of the roadmap of how to write it.
I think it would be a wonderful place to do that now if you'd like.
Okay. Can I share my screen?
I believe so. Yes.
Okay, here we go. Let me give this a shot. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, guys. This came to me and as an epiphany a couple of months ago. I've had so many times I've sat there and repeated the same thing over and over and over and over to clients. So you have an introduction, then you do X, then you do Y. And I'm like, how can I make this even more simplistic, right? And I was finally able to come up with this idea of the ABCs of the personal statement. Okay, guys? So take a look at this. I know it sounds really juvenile, but it really, really, really works. Okay, guys? So take a look. First thing I have on the top there is tells you, again, just put it there for yourself. How has your life paved the path for you to pursue law? Okay. The second one is, how will you add value to the incoming class in the law school community, guys? So keep that in mind. Remember, separate those two. Okay. When thinking about the personal statement, guys, I'm going to get pumped about that. I always get really pumped. So if I go too fast, slow me down. Think about your life like a movie. I'm in Santa Monica, so you guys know I'm like 2 clicks away from Hollywood. So this is all about the movie industry, right? But think about your life like a movie. How does it start? What's gonna draw in the audience? What's the compelling factor that pulls me in, right? Am I ever gonna start an essay off with, I want to go to law school because? Snooze fest. Could you imagine you're in a movie and that's how it starts? I want to write a movie about. You're like, get me out of this movie, right? So you want to start it off with something that can really grab their attention, right? If the audience is the admissions committee, and you're the protagonist, and I'm the director as your admissions consultant, and we're directing this whole thing and putting it together, how are we going to start it? Okay. So number one, A. Okay. A is for attention grabbing, right? Attention grabber. And here I gave you some, like the word count, about 100, 125 words. And what you're trying to do is come up with something that could grab their attention, right? So I used the example recently with a group I was talking to. Imagine you're a veteran. And you say, it was a hot day as I was sitting in the barracks and suddenly, boom, I see a plume of smoke over the horizon. The building shook, but somehow it didn't even impact me whatsoever. In fact, I was suffering from PTSD and I didn't even know it. The reality is there are so many veterans who are similarly suffering from this affliction. And yet there's so little attention given to them and so little understanding of what PTSD is. And this is really what drives me want to be an advocate to be able to win the benefits for these, for those who served our country. Something like that, right? That's very short and simplistic, but you get it, right? A hot day, I can see the building tops, I'm in my barracks. What are you guys doing? You're literally closing your eyes and imagining that exact scene, the sweat, the dust, the barracks, the cramped conditions, looking over the horizon, plume of smoke. You guys have seen it many times, right? And then through that, you're basically teasing out. That is how you started it, but don't leave me hanging. I want that first paragraph to tell me, where are we going? I am suffering from X. Suddenly I put it back to me. I'm the person suffering from it. I've got the one who has a PTSD, right? And yet it's a bigger problem. Micro, macro. I'm the one who's suffering. It's a bigger affliction. I want to be able to resolve it. You guys see that? Okay. That's how I started it. If you just read that one paragraph and didn't read anything else, and you guys know this because you guys all went to undergrad, that's your thesis, right? That's the start. Just that alone is a synopsis of the whole essay. Okay. You've drawn me in. Tell me more. Okay. B is for background. You guys see it right there, right? B for background. It's about 100 to 125 to 175 words. Boom. You're telling them who you are, what your background is, right? So let's say, we've got, again, we'll use Ben, poor guy. I'm going to use Ben. It's an easy name to remember, and I can just keep doing it. So imagine Ben says, like, I grew up in this area. Let's just say I grew up with a single mom, some siblings, whatever it is, talks about his background, his, this. Most of you guys are, I assume, did you guys already graduate from college? Raise your hand if you graduated. So you guys are what, how many years out? 1 year out?
I am graduating this year personally.
Okay, you're graduating this year. Go ahead, tell me. I feel like we're the Brady Bunch. You tell me over here. What about you? I mean, you guys 1 year out, 2 years out?
Looks like 3 years out, just graduated. Jocelyn just graduated. Shakir is 3 years out. Okay. Anyone else? Yep.
3 years out. Yeah. So if you've been 3 years out, for example, guess what you got that other people don't? First of all, love it, guys. If you graduate and you go straight to law school, it's not easy. Okay. Some people tell you to do that because they're worried that you'll lose momentum, right? I took about 2 years out, but you get also professional experience, right? So most of you guys can talk about the professional experience aspect as well. So when you're talking about background, the most important thing, guys, is your core identity. That's what you're trying to tease out there through your experiences. We're trying to find your core identity and your values. Core identity and values. Why? Because core identity and values, if you stick to them, they become what? Authentic. And if you abide, right, by what you believe in and you live by what you believe in, you are authentic. And if you're authentic in this world where there's so much inauthenticity, right, you're compelling, you're interesting, you're believable, you're trustworthy, and you're someone I want to have in my class. Does that make sense? So that B background is really going to plant the seeds for your identity, for your core, for those things you value. For me, I was born abroad, right? I traveled when I was a kid. For me, my identity is a lot to do with culturalism, diversity, compassion, EQ, travel, right? A sense of seizing the moment. That's really what makes me who I am, right? And so I was able to tease that out just from that beginning, from that background, right? So think about that. That background's about who you are and what you believe in and your values, right? C is for career. Now that you've grabbed my attention, now that you've told me who you are, now I want to know, what have you been doing about who you are? Are you living to the values that you stand by? If you tell me you're compassionate and you've never volunteered, I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. I'm not. Don't tell me when you're 65 and retired, you're going to give back. I don't believe in that crap. If you're not giving back now in some way or other, mentoring other people, doing these things that you guys are doing, then something's off. So don't tell me you're compassionate. Tell me you're not compassionate. Tell me you want to make a lot of money. I'll believe that, right? I'll believe it, right? But don't tell me you're compassionate. You don't stand by what you do. Career is for answering that question. And career can come if you guys are like you, Gabby, you're still in school, so you may not have a lot of professional experience. You're going to basically say, you're going to talk a lot about the experience that you've had in college, the student organizations you've been part of, the classes that you've taken, the experiences that you had in college, any volunteer experiences in college, right? For some of those, you said there was somebody here that had 2 or 3 years of experience. Those guys probably worked maybe at a law firm or worked in some capacity, right? I worked at a law firm. So I was able to talk about the fact that what I wanted to do was go back to my country of origin and help create laws that would allow more legal recourse and equitability across the board. And by working at a law firm, I got a better sense of what the law can do, at least in a corporate or commercial environment. It wasn't ideal, but it is what I had, and I surrendered to that fact. Okay? So your career tells you, this is who I am, and this is what I've done about it. Okay? That's C. D. D is for direction. Now that you've told me who you are, what you've been doing about it, now you're going to tell me, here's where I want to go. I'm doing this, but here's really where I want to go. So you shift gears and you tell me about the direction, the vision, the goal, okay? 100, 125 words. Guys, this is the keystone. This is where the whole essay pivots. This is where the movie changes. You can't just give 2 hours of action or 2 hours of context. You've got to tell me about a pivot moment, something that happens, right, guys? You guys know the story arc. It starts off with an action. It hits a crescendo. A decision needs to be made by the main protagonist character. Guys, you've seen this so many times, right? The decision was made most likely to help them better understand themselves and their own identity and their success at the end of it, right? Classic branding. Character has a problem, meets a guide, right? The guide tells them a plan. They execute the plan. They avoid failure and they see success. Classic. This is like a book I read, Building Your Brand. Guys, it's like literally almost all movies are this way. Stories are made this way because we relate to adversity. We relate to other people's problems. Not like, hey, I want to drive fast. I got into a car and drove fast. No. I want to drive fast, but I have a fear of driving fast. I got into a car accident. I had to overcome that. I had to drive, and that was, how many times we have seen that movie, guys, where they had to overcome that hurdle, that main sticking point in their head, and they finally achieved success, and now they're freaking phenomenal race car drivers, right? So same thing here. Talk about that direction and how you pivoted and moved and say, this is who I am. This is what I've been doing, but this is where I want to go. Okay, so very, very important paragraph, and that's the direction of where you want to go. Okay. Then when you go from there, you go to E, educational, program, and school, guys, both. Don't just say, I really want to go to UCLA Law. Now, you may say, well, okay, he says UCLA Law. I know why he wants to go to law school. But you want to indicate to them that there is still a desire to go to law. So there's a discussion, and that really goes into direction, which is the program. At the end of direction is the program to say law. And then at the beginning of E is the program, and then into the school, right? Because guess what? What happens if, what happens if one of you, let's say Marcos, another person on this, says to himself, I'm going to write an essay, and at the top of the essay, I'm going to write personal statement for a master's in public administration. And I read the essay, and guess what? It works for a public administration degree. Did he succeed for a law school personal statement? No, because the essay was not unique enough. It didn't follow suit to answer the question about why law. It was a great essay, but not about law. It was a great essay about advocacy, right? Or policy, but it has to go back to that crux about law. Otherwise, the school will say, you know what? It's better off the person goes to the Master's in Public Administration. Why are they applying to our school? Or how do we know that they're not applying to two schools at the same time to use the same essay twice? Guys, that's the uniqueness test. If I change the name, but Gabby, if it works, it's not unique enough. If I change the title of the school, of the program, I call Master's in Public Administration or a Master's in, anthropology or psychology or whatever, and it still works, it's not unique enough to the program. Okay, guys? So keep that in mind. And that's where you want to do the education. A couple of quick things, if you guys want to write this down, the things that that you can talk about in terms of the school: clinics, classes, journals, the community, right? The diversity of the community, the location of the school, the reputation of the school, where the alumni are going. Guys, every top school I apply to, every top one, I found someone who went to that school, a friend, somebody I worked with, and they wrote me letters of recommendation. Does that make sense? So for somebody at Berkeley, I was like, hey, can you write me a letter of rec? And they were students. And I just supplemented it in the application. And if the school read it, great. And if the school didn't read it, it didn't matter. Okay. But that's how much I cared about getting into some of these schools. I literally talked to alum, and some of them even wrote me letters of recommendation. So these are some of the things you want to be thinking about. And when you're pulling out that information, don't just look on their website. Take a look at their journals, literally look at their journals and what have they published. Take a look at where the students are going. If you're like, well, how do I know where people are going with a UC Berkeley degree or UCLA degree or wherever? Go to your LinkedIn, type UCLA law. Guess what's going to happen? You're going to probably find out quite a few people that were alum of that school, and you can see where they're headed off. Corporate law, whatever, immigration law, what have you, right? So do your due diligence and think out of the box about where you can get that information, okay? And then finally, as in every movie, show them what success looked like, bring closure to the whole experience. And F is for finale, okay? And that's you bring the whole thing back. You can't just stop. Bring the whole thing back to the beginning, that action sequence, that plume of smoke, right? The PTSD. Now that I've been able to overcome, identify that I have PTSD and I'm going through therapy, I'm helping other veterans do the same thing. And I'm also helping veterans better understand how they can get their benefits so that they could live better lives. Does that make sense? Sorry, I went off on that one, but this is really critical, guys, is the ABCs of the personal statement. And really, this can work for the diversity statement. If you guys decide to apply to grad school, this could work for the grad school statements. It is the key to success of how to write a personal statement.
Perfect. We have a question in the chat from Jocelyn as to, she's asking, how did you get the alum to write a letter of recommendation? And could you elaborate on that process?
Sure. So in this case, it's just contacts, guys. I mean, the whole world is about networking and so forth. So in my case, I was the president of an identity group at undergrad at UCLA. And through that, I met other identity groups in other schools. And then when I went to those schools, then those schools also had active law schools. Because guys, remember, I don't know where you guys all went to undergrad. I don't even know where you guys are located. But I mean, Steve's located in New York. So I mean, he's got clients all over America. So this is going everywhere. But you know, like some law schools, let's use New York as an example. Columbia, NYU are pretty much smack right in the middle of where the campus is, right? Because Columbia is right across the street from the main campus. NYU is in Washington Square Park where the law school is. So sometimes the law schools are quite active on even the main campus. When I was a law student, I taught on the main campus. In fact, I've got a crazy hack of how I graduated with a profit from law school, which most people are like, I still don't get it. I don't know how I did it, but I pulled it off. And part of it was teaching classes as a graduate student instructor at Berkeley. But I was very involved. And so when I went to those campuses as a student rep for my identity group, I was meeting up with law students at the school, got to know them, and they just went to bat for me. I mean, those are the ones who wrote me the recommendations. Other ones just gave me information, like great intel. And then I worked at a law firm, I told you guys. And so I had some of the law firm partners or lawyers who went to the schools I was applying to also go to bat for me and write me a letter of recommendation. And then guys, look, at the end of the day, you could always help advise the recommender of what to write. You don't just say, write me a rec. Guys, there's nothing worse. Wow. After all these years of working in business and so forth, there's nothing worse than telling people a big ask with nothing with it. Hey, Ben, do you mind if you can run faster or something like that? And he's gonna be like, what? How? You're like, okay, well, let me help you out. I want you to run down the street, okay, every day wearing these shoes at this time, okay? Even if he doesn't want to, I've given him parameters that we can then start moving around, right? Like think about algorithms, right? You have a big data set, you give a set specific instruction, you get great results. Instructions suck, results suck. Feeling me? I just figured that one out because I didn't even know what the hell an algorithm was really until I actually start researching it. But it's exactly how you want to do it. So if you go to a recommender, right, ask them, listen, I would really be honored if you can write me a recommendation. Here's how I did in your class. Here's my resume. Here's a sample of my personal statement. Here's really where I was hoping that, you know, the direction of where I'd like the personal statement to go with your, you know, with all due respect, if that's something that you can do for me. That person's hesitating, get away from them. You don't need lukewarm, mediocre letters, okay? You want to get top-notch cheerleaders, because the people who are getting to the top schools are the ones who have phenomenal letters of rec, okay? So give them a little direction, give them a heads up, and make it so easy with the instructions, not where you baby them, but give them enough instruction so that they feel very, very at ease to be able to execute a great letter of rec for you. Because guys, when the LSAT is not as important as it was maybe 10 years ago because of how standardized testing is waning, recommendations are becoming super important. Personal statements and applications are becoming super important. So you don't want to go wrong, especially on the recommendations.
I appreciate you breaking down that process for us. And one thing that seems so evident in your framework as to how to write a personal statement, and even in that note, is how thorough you are throughout every single stage of the process. And I think I, as well as other students, can really take that away from this conversation. Ben had a question regarding the tone of the personal statement, and specifically, how do you convey the tone of overcoming adversity in a way that's authentic and unique, but not, he used the word dramatic.
Yeah, so where do you stop? And that's going to be one of my top do not do's. Is you don't want to come out on a personal statement and it's just cry me a river. You're throwing every emotional cue and it's ending up with nothing. Like you're just talking about your life and this, and then it doesn't kind of go down that path to why law school. I think you want to be somewhat, you want to make it dramatic in some ways, right? But you want to temper it so it's not over the top. When it starts becoming over the top to the point that your emotions, you know, when it's like you get emotional and a movie starts choking up and then it gets so over and extra, you're like, wow, okay, now you lost me, right? You want that balance. You want to be moved by it. If you're not moved by it, if you're not aha'd by it, then you miss the mark. But if you're throwing everything at it where it just becomes so much ideas to the point that you've desensitized the reader, that's when you know you've gone overboard. And listen, Ben, you've got to show a sample of this to someone, because here's another thing. Here's a small hack. If you ever want to show this to somebody, a personal statement, show it to 3 people. Max. Someone who knows you very well, but may not know the law school admissions process, but somebody knows you very well. A mentor, a good friend, somebody you trust, right? Number 2, someone whose English is on point, who can read through and be like, oops, this paragraph is just not flowing to this. This sentence structure is off, right? At least we can give you that from that objective standard. And the third person is someone who knows the law school admissions process well or has been to law school themselves. If you can find that trifecta, booyah, go get them. Chances are you're not going to be able to find all 3, but those are the 3 people. So when you write that essay and you're like, I'm worried about being over the top, too extra, too embellishing, start with too embellishing and extra, Ben, and then scale it back. Because sometimes it's harder to write a story and then add more emotion to it. Sometimes the people who read it, they may miss the mark and then you end up writing something dry. So I'd rather be more emotional and then tone it down than start off with something bare bones and then try to build it up, because sometimes it's harder to do it that way.
Thank you. And we also had another question from a student asking whether it's okay or how would you navigate writing about the adversity that somebody else's experience or adversity that somebody else has overcome, but that has inspired you to pursue a degree in law?
It really comes down to how close in proximity you are to that individual. Don't tell me, Gandhi, and don't tell me MLK, because that story's been told too many times. If that person's inspired you, but they inspired your professor, your high school teacher, who then inspired you, that degree of separation is closer. It makes more sense to me, right? There's no way you can tell me you were that inspired by MLK that your whole life trajectory went based on that individual, right? You have to find someone that was close to you, right? Someone that was there, that touched you, or that was just 1 degree of separation removed from you, right? That really helps. If you can't do that, you need to mention their story and the inspiration and how they inspired you, but you've got to put it back into your life, right? Many women probably are talking about Kamala Harris, an incredible story, right? But if you sit there and talk about Kamala Harris and the fact, with her mom raising her, then her mom passing away and her sister being, a badass, and she's awesome. And then she got dinged for, when she was the California Attorney General, and, she got a lot of, flack for that, and being, a senator, and, some of her guys, if half your essay is written about her, that's a problem. You guys want to start with it, talk about that, but then talk about how that impacted you. It's so critical. I cannot tell you, that's one of the biggest faults, is when people just start talking way too much about one individual, and then it takes away from who they are. But anchoring a story in someone else's experience is also a great way, right? Somebody's doing something on immigration, and then you talk about, when I met, Maria, and Maria was a dreamer, and her mother had crossed, and then you talk about that. That's interesting. But then always go back to yourself. Just kind of anchor it in, or at least provide us with a little context of the story to give us a little humanity, but don't make it about them. In the end of the day, it's a personal statement. It's about you.
No, thank you, Hamada. And I definitely relate to that importance of tying everything back, because in my own personal statements, I found that my readers got lost when I didn't do a good job of that. So really important to drive home the message. So I actually just wanted to go take a couple steps back to that framework that you walked us through, and really ask you to speak to your experience of tying your career interest into, I believe it was the D, I drive through. Was that what? Yeah. And so for you, how would you advise students that are trying to navigate their interest in a specific area of law? And how would you advise students who are looking to perhaps tie that interest in that specific area of law into the school that they are interested in? Or you mentioned, the importance of really addressing key programs or classes or journals within a school to drive home the message that this is the law school I'd like to go to.
Well, if you're one of the lucky ones that knows what you want to do with a law degree, and I say very lucky, right, because not everybody's going to know, then everything falls together beautifully, right? So if my goal was to do international law or international development law, it fits perfectly, right? Because then I looked at the school, I looked at what law journals they had, what classes they had, right? Where the alumni went, and I was able to tie all that together. I want to study X, and Professor X is brilliant at this, and I'd love to study with them. And there's a clinic on international justice that I really would like to be involved in, so I can get more practical experience. And I would love to write on the International Law Journal, because I think I can really put some of my ideas and scholarship onto paper, as well as critique others' ideas in this space. And I believe that your school will be able to provide me with a holistic perspective in terms of the community, in terms of the extracurriculars, and in terms of the academic environment that will allow me to flourish and, cut my teeth in the space that I really want to pursue upon graduation. Now, some schools will not be able to provide you with a strong international relations program or international law program. So, one of you guys will come back to me and say, hey, I really want to do immigration law. I mean, immigration law is a classic where most schools are good at that. I really want to do intellectual property rights law, right? But some of the schools I'm looking at don't have a very strong one. What do I do? It's a tough question, right? And some people will say, water down why you want to what you want to do with the law degree, and just focus on the fact that you want to be an advocate, right? I always love the word advocate rather than say I want to be a lawyer. I'd love to be an advocate, right? To advocate for people, for a cause, for, something. So you can keep that a little bit more general and get less specific. And nobody's going to ding you if you don't know what you want to do with the law degree afterwards, other than just some type of advocacy work. I am going to say, though, it just makes for a much easier statement to write when you know why you want to go to law school. And I want to say it's probably pretty tough to want to go to law school and not know why at this stage, guys. It's a 3-year commitment. It's $200,000+. Like, you pretty much want to know why, right? And try to weave that into your story.
And so from an admissions perspective, do you think that you spoke to international law specifically, there's a risk in expressing a very strong interest in one area of law specifically?
If it makes sense as part of your life, let's use, Solomon right here. So Solomon he has a story, he grew up here, he had X, Y, and Z happen, and then suddenly he wants to do tax law. What? Where the hell did that come from? Right? But if he had, let's say, in this situation, his uncle or his aunt was wrongfully indicted for fraud due to accounting discrepancies that brought the business down, causing bankruptcy, and she didn't have the ability for legal recourse, right? And because she didn't understand that there was this loophole that she fell into that she didn't know. And so that really exposed her, causing bankruptcy, causing, her life to really take a turn for the worst. And he wants to basically advise minority businesses or something in the field of tax law. Booyah. Now we've got a story. You see? Now, let's just say the school sucks at tax law. You can just say small business law. Let's say the school sucks at small business law. Well, you just tell them you want to do that. Eventually, I don't care if I don't study small business law or tax law in your school. Guys, you're studying to become lawyers, not studying to become tax lawyers, right? You guys see the difference? We're getting a general law degree. You guys understand how many subjects do you know are going to be in the bar exam? I think in California, there's like 18. In New York, there's 24 subjects you're going to be tested on. Criminal law, criminal procedure, torts, contracts, constitutional law, property law, right? So they're not going to just teach you to become a tax attorney. You will become that tax attorney when you practice. So you don't have to, if you give them a general gist of where you want to go and what you want to do, it doesn't have to be that specific, but it's nice when it's specific. It really is. It makes a hell of a story. It makes it much better, more compelling.
Apologies. Perhaps just a last question on that note. How heavily would you weight, it seems like there's a lot of students with work experience, so work experience in your personal statement?
Not that much, because it's not a requirement for law school, guys, right? If you are applying for an MBA program, mission critical, right? But law, it's not required. So if you sit there and you put everything in the professional experience, great, but I would really still try to make it more personal. Now, if you're someone on the older side applying, like let's say 30 or 35, and you have like 10, 15 years of experience, it's not going to be inconceivable that you're going to talk more about that. But don't worry, guys, there's no requirement to have experience to go to law school. So don't feel compelled to throw experiences out there. Here's another hack, guys, get ready for this. For your diversity statement, that's where I like to include volunteer experience. Okay, so let's say Jocelyn has professional experience and volunteer experience. She doesn't know which one to use for which essay, or she's more interested in writing about the volunteer only because the volunteer actually speaks to what she wants to do. Then I would say use the volunteer for the personal statement. But if not, and you just volunteered, it's part of your identity, but the professional one is also very equally interesting. I would put the volunteer in the diversity statement and make that the anchor, and the professional in the personal statement. Not make it the anchor, but make it part of the story. But I can tell you, you do not want to write a personal statement and a diversity statement that are so similar. They're complementary. In fact, you may even want to plant a couple of little seeds in the personal statement that really will be spelled out in the diversity statement. Okay? So I talked about being international and loving traveling in the personal statement, but very mildly, probably only in B, right? Background. But I really talked a lot about that in the diversity statement. Why? Because it's how you're going to add value to the class. And how do you add value to the class? Through the life experiences you've had, the identity you identify with, right? The way that you fraternize with other people. They want to know that you can do well in class, get along with people, add to the class discussions. Remember, guys, law school is all about the Socratic method, right? It's a lot about asking questions to get to the answers, right? It's not just talk down from the professor to the students. The students have to report back to the professor and to the group. So you have to be ready to add value. And that's why we want diversity in classes. We don't want to have just, heterogeneous people. We don't want to necessarily have all Caucasian people or all African-American people or all Asian people. It's not about just the identity. It's about diversity, right? So you want to have a bit of everything so that each one of them can provide their experience in law, because law is multifaceted and it is a cross-section of our society.
Thank you, Hamada. And it's, you've given us a lot of really valuable tips as to how to write a diversity statement and how to write a personal statement. And personally, some of the things that I came away with were authenticity and really being detail oriented and thorough and just true to your story and really tying in the relationships of your identity to the experiences that you've had. Perhaps in a closing note, would you mind speaking to what not to do in a personal statement or diversity statement in the last few minutes that we have together?
Sure. So I'll rattle these off. I just gave you guys a classic about the diversity and the personal. Don't repeat the same story between the two. That's important. Ben asking the question about when to over embellish, when under embellish. That's a great and a very important one. You don't want to go over the top where you lose the audience, and you don't want to be too dry where you lose the audience. You want to make sure that you tie everything together so there's an element of continuity between who you are, what you've done, and what you want to do. You don't want there to be a break in the middle of it. Who you are, then what you've done is completely errant, and then what you want to do is completely errant. There has to be an element of continuity along all the way, right? Make sure to read your personal statement over and over and over and over and again because you're applying to law school. And being meticulous and having a strong attention to detail is important for the law degree, right? And for the legal career. You don't want to be making mistakes when you're providing opinions to judges because they'll catch that, right? So you want to make sure that you're very meticulous. Don't give your statement to too many people to read, because when you have too many cooks in the kitchen, people are going to give you a ton of different opinions. I gave you guys the 3 that you want to give it to. If all those 3 can be 2 or 1, even better. Don't overshare your personal statement with other people because you'll get too many opinions, which will throw you off. Do not write your personal statement in the last minute thinking, hey, you know what? I got a 173. I hate you for getting the 173 because I knew if I had a 3.0 and a 173, I would probably got into Columbia because it's the most annoying thing. I can't stand the LSAT. Sorry, guys. Sorry, Steve. I hate that exam, right? It broke me. I passed the bar in California, the hardest bar, the first time I took it. I took the LSAT 3 times. I still screwed it up. So for me, it didn't work. So don't bank, though, on the LSAT because, you could get a 173 and have a 3.0, right? But you still want to bank on a great personal statement to put it all together, guys, because the more compelling you are, the higher the chances you get into a better school. And here's the best part. You start playing one school off the other school to get more financial aid. Columbia, Harvard, I got into both of you guys, or Harvard, Yale, I got into both, right? But Harvard, I really want to go to you, but, Yale's also compelling. Well, how about I give you a little bit, as they say, I wet your beak. I give you like $10,000. Well, yeah, listen, they just gave me 10. What can you do? I can give you 20. Well, listen, Harvard, I really want to go. I'm going to have to stop the buck, but it's going to give you 30. Hey, that's great. That's better than nothing, right? So you want to make sure that you're the best candidate possible. So don't leave your application to the last minute. Okay. And I would say I had written another one for you guys. Here's a great one. Abide by the word count, guys. Okay. Abide by the word count. If they say 2 pages, double spaced, stick to it. Don't write more. Some schools are asking for up to 4, don't feel compelled to write 4 and just shove information in there. Right. So just keep it kind of tight within that. And I'll leave the last one to, don't give any false information, guys. They'll catch you. So don't, goes back to Ben's point about embellishing. You could embellish. There's maybe Ben's point more about being dramatic. That could be one thing that you deal with. But on the other side, don't use or falsify information. So I was the president of this society and we experienced X, Y, and Z. I could look that up, right? This incident where this happened, everything's Googleable. Right? So don't do it because it may come back to haunt you when you become a head honcho and applying for Congress or something. There you go. I don't know how many that was, but I could rattle off probably even more, but those are hopefully a good enough list for you guys.
No, thank you. We have one last question if you have time for it.
I could do this.
I
love doing this stuff.
Yeah, I really appreciate how passionate you are about this subject. So Ben asks, do you think that addendum essays are more important if you are an older person applying?
What are addendums more important when you're an older student applying?
Yes.
To the degree that you want to mention why it is that you took time off before you applied to law school?
Ben, would you mind? It looks like he's nodding, so yes.
No, I don't think that's a big issue, Ben. I mean, if you, unless you went into, no, I don't think so. I don't think you'd use an addendum to write, hey, listen, I took 6 years before I applied to law school. During that time, I was a banker. And then now I decided to go to law school. Well, that's really going to be addressed, I think, in your statement to show why you want to go to law school. Your addendum really comes down to about 3-4 things. Classics. Why you didn't do well in the LSAT, why you didn't do well in school, time you took off in school for medical reasons or what have you, any legal issues that you faced, DUI, what have you, right? So those are pretty much the main reasons you'll use the addendum, okay? But that's pretty much it. So, and remember, when you're writing your addendum, guys, you're not using it as a document full of excuses. You're keeping it short and sweet, 300, 400 points. I took I really wanted to go to law school. Excuse me. When I got to school, I didn't do, when I got to law school, I really wanted to do as much as I can and maximize my educational experience. I became president of X, Y, and Z. However, because I was not able to manage my schedule effectively during my first or second year of school, my grades suffered as a consequence. I was able to take a step back, speak to mentors and my professors. I was able to get a better handle of my time management skills, and therefore was able to improve exponentially my final year. Therefore, I fully believe that my sense of determination, who I am and what I've done, as well as my academic scores in my final year of school are far better indicators for my ability to exceed the expectations required of a student in your program. Dunzo funzo, that's it. I admit it, I screwed up. I bit off more than I can chew. I admit it, my time management skills suck, but I did better and improved over time. I didn't make excuses. You guys see the difference? Okay, I admit it, I've learned, I've grown from that experience, I've moved on, I'm a much better student now, and I will excel in your school.
Thank you, Hamada. On behalf of LSAT Unplugged and myself personally, I'd like to thank you for joining us and sharing all of your advice. It was really valuable. And with that, I close this interview and session. So thank you all for joining.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me, guys. And you have my information. If you have any questions, please let me know. And again, a big thank you to Steve for putting together a great event and doing some awesome work for his clients. Thanks again, guys.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.